Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, going to be giving you an overview and thoughts on Red Mage, one of the two new jobs added in Final Fantasy XIV's latest expansion, Stormblood. Now, I want to make this very clear at the beginning of the video. Two things. One, this is going to be an overview and thoughts. So if you just want to hear my thoughts on the job, I'll add a timestamp in the description of the video, so you don't need to hear all this information that you might already know. Second, I am not an expert at the job. In fact, I'm not an expert on casters at all. It's the role I've spent the least amount of time playing over the last 4 years. So this is not a guide in any way. I'll just be explaining the bare basics of the job. Elysium's website has a guide for Red Mage that's pretty well written up, and there are also a ton of other resources on the job all over the net. I'll include a link to the Elysium guide in the description of the video. So my thoughts will also not be coming with much experience. I haven't done things like Omega Savage, but I have, of course, raided, so I do know the value of having a Red Mage in the raid group itself. And I do have some limited experience with level 70 content, so that's where my sort of train of thought and perspective will be coming from. So first, let's do an overview on the job for people who may not be familiar with it and just want to know about it from the beginning. So I will say this, Red Mage to me feels like proof that you can capture the essence of a job, and it doesn't need to be accompanied by complex rotations. Red Mage, classically in the Final Fantasy games, is known as a jack of all trades and a master of none. Now, of course, Red Mage being a dedicated DPS in Final Fantasy XIV means it's obviously the master of one of its roles. But it's also a job that's very easy to pick up, still leaves room for mastery, and takes all the different aspects of Red Mage, or the other aspects that I do remember from the older games. Things like combining black magic and white magic, having some melee presence, as well as having certain supportive skills, so it does at times feel like a jack of all trades, even though your main purpose is to deal DPS. Now, Red Mage in Final Fantasy XIV has one primary focus on balancing white and black mana. These are not the same things as MP. They are two different resources tracked in your job gauge. To do this, you're given just a handful of spells to keep an eye out for, as well as tons of procs to help deal more damage while continuing to generate these white and black mana resources. One of the most key attributes of the job is Dual Cast, another callback to Red Mage from the older games. With this trait, every time you perform a spell that has a cast time, your next spell will be cast instantly. The spell has to have a cast time, so you can't use things like Swift Cast in order to proc Dual Cast, but Swift Cast does have its uses on Red Mage otherwise. Most of the time, you'll be fishing for dual cast procs using Jolt or Jolt 2, then instant casting your Ver Arrow or Ver Thunder spells, depending on which mana you want to raise, white or black. Sometimes, Ver Arrow and Ver Thunder can proc another spell of the same mana type, Ver Stone or Ver Fire. In these cases, you hard cast these in place of a Jolt 2, then proccing dual cast and using it again on Ver Arrow or Ver Thunder. Jolt 2 itself also sometimes procs the Impact spell, which is just a stronger mana-neutral spell for when you have no Ver Fire or Ver Stone procs. As you can see, you just keep pushing these spells out and just getting procs and, kind of messing with your rotation depending on which procs you get and which procs you don't get. Honestly, the only part of the job that sometimes gets frustrating is just having too many procs and feeling like you'll never use them all. Not exactly the worst thing when you look at some of the other jobs in the game. So with these spells, like I said, you'll aim to raise both your black and white mana. You're going to want to keep them closely balanced, and it's something that players can forget frequently when they're first playing. You tend to have to make slight adjustments to your rotation as you level up and acquire new spells, especially when you get Ver Flare and Ver Holy. At some point, you'll want both of those manas over 80, with one of them higher than the other. That's the very important thing that you have to learn to do once you get your hands on Ver Flare or Ver Holy, as they have procs dependent on one of them being higher than the other. So once they are both above 80, you can do a fast and powerful melee combo, ending with one of two spells, Ver Flare or Ver Holy. Now, if your white mana is higher than your black mana, you cast Ver Flare. If your black mana is higher than your white mana, you cast Ver Holy. This ensures that you get a 100% guaranteed proc on Ver Fire or Ver Stone, respectively. After executing the melee combo and that Ver Flare or Holy, you go right back to raising your mana again. It's a fairly quick cycle once you get the hang of the job. On top of that, you have a ton of off-global cooldown skills that you can do and especially utilize when you're waiting for those spells to cast back around, especially right after a dual cast. Now, two abilities you'll become very familiar with are Korakor and Displacement. Core is a gap closer, and basically you use it to get in range for your melee combo, and Displacement makes you backflip away from the target so you can get safely away and continue casting spells. You can cast spells from melee range, it's just you have Displacement, so why not use it? You use these not only to get around the battlefield and use your melee combo, but both of these abilities do damage upon use. So there may be times where your melee combo's not ready, but these skills are ready, so you may find yourself just using them just for the sake of getting them off cooldown. You don't want to be sitting on abilities for too long. That's true of any job, and these abilities are really no different. Just be careful not to throw yourself off the arena with Displacement. It is a backflip, and so if there's a cliff, maybe don't. Acceleration ensures your next Ver Arrow or Ver Thunder procs, Ver Stone or Ver Fire 100% of the time. There's really no reason not to use this as frequently as possible. You also have a couple of off-global cooldown abilities that deal damage. Flesh is an off-global cooldown nuke that is single target, it's on a really short cooldown, and Contre Sixt is the same, but it's AoE with a slightly longer cooldown. They're both very strong and are great when you're waiting on your global cooldown after a dual cast. Manification is a big one. It resets the cooldowns on Core and Displacement and doubles your current white and black mana values. It's pretty much used when your mana is just above 40, of course without the two being equal like we established earlier, and when Displacement and Core are both on cooldown. It's common for red mages in their opener to just use Displacement and Core when not using their melee combo. So that way, when they get to 40-40 on their mana, they can then use Manification in order to get the full benefit out of the ability. Now, the next two abilities have been highly controversial and will play a big part in my thoughts in the latter half of the video. Embolden is one of the two big reasons why players like having a red mage around. One of its effects is that it increases the red mage's magic damage for 20 seconds. It starts as a 10% bonus, but every 4 seconds, the bonus is lowered by 2%. It also grants, and this is the big one, 10% physical damage bonus to all allies around the red mage, with that same deteriorating effect. Now in 4-man groups, it's pretty common for red mages to just use Embolden when it's best for them, which is, I believe, after your first melee ability in your melee combo. That's when I see most of them use it at least. However, when we're talking about 8-man content, it's very common to line it up with party buffs and debuffs, things like Trick Attack, Brotherhood, Battle Voice, Chain Stratagem, Astro Cards, etc. Basically, it's just another buff to pile onto your physical damage dealers when all these other buffs are up as well, and it just adds a lot of outgoing damage to the party, especially over the course of an entire fight. The other skill, and probably the one that's even more controversial, is Raise. Now, similar to Summoner's Resurrection, it's a combat raise. You know, they're not the only DPS that can do this. However, remember that dual cast thing we talked about earlier? Well, keep in mind that red mages are not only capable of swift cast raising, but dual cast raising as well, giving them very frequent access to instant combat reses. Now you can combine that with another ability they have, Ver Cure, which unlike Summoner's Physic is an incredibly potent cure for a DPS to have, and red mages become masters at helping parties recover from what look like impossible situations. I've had situations where both the healers are dead, and the red mage saves the group. This is again going to be a big thing we talk about in the latter half of the video. The only downside is, obviously, that's cutting into their DPS, and more importantly, it's cutting into their MP, which will eventually cut into their DPS. If you don't have the right MP tools to keep you going after that, it gets a little bit rough, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now finally, we come to role actions, where red mages have access to the same pool of skills as Summoner or Black Mage, so this is where they're completely the same as the other casters. One slot, however, that you will permanently reserve is Lucid Dreaming, as red mage has no built-in MP regeneration into the job itself. Without Lucid Dreaming, if anything goes wrong, you're stuck with no MP, unless you have another caster using Mana Shift on you, or bards using Refresh, or a bard or machinist using Refresh, but that's not going to be enough over the course of an entire fight. As for the other role actions, I guess it kinda depends on what you need. Despite not having an infinite mana pool, I have seen a lot of red mages take Mana Shift, to give it to the healers in case anything happens. Addle, as a defensive raid cooldown, is very, very common. Swift Cast can be used to, either use it on a raise like mentioned earlier, or you can actually use it to just instant cast either a Ver Arrow or a Ver Thunder, usually just to either offset or equalize your mana pools in some way. Basically used to make sure that you're all all set for when you go to do your melee combo. Of course, diversion's very important because enmity can be a big problem. Red mages front load a lot of damage, so it's very common for them to take that. And of course, you have Apocatastasis as a defensive cooldown for your tanks, another very common use. So you do have quite a few different options as Red Mage. Just Lucid Dreaming, you're going to take that. Now, we've kind of described the flow of the job and the different tools that it has in my overview section. Now we're going to start on my thoughts section. I said it at the beginning, I love that Red Mage is proof you don't need an overly complex job to be a new job in Final Fantasy XIV. Samurai, while it's very easy to kind of get into and perform at a minimum level, it does have quite a bit of complexity in terms of min-maxing. Red Mage does have some min-max complexity for players that are looking for it, but it's definitely not on the same level as many of the other jobs. Even looking at the other casters, Summoner probably has a deeper amount of min-maxing going into that. So there's not a lot of growth here with Red Mage. You know, it's very easy to play, has a very high skill floor, and does not have an incredibly high skill ceiling. So that can be good for players looking to get into it, but it can at times be less satisfying for players looking for a more complex scenario, to have more buttons to press, or to just have a different flow of the way the job feels. Now, that high skill floor is really one of the big things that comes into the controversy of Red Mage, because it performs consistently well in raids. Even players that aren't necessarily playing at the top of their level, or can't play at the level that other players expect them to, can usually perform on an above adequate level on Red Mage. And they, of course, still have their utility, such as their Embolden, such as their Verraise, so they still hold great value to the party. On top of them being so easy to play, it has led other casters to sort of lean towards Red Mage, and that's really the big problem with it. You just can't beat infinite raises. It's not infinite, I know that's hyperbole, but it feels that way at times. The Embolden being such a huge party damage buff, having the actual potent cure. And then on top of that, things like APOC and Mana Shift, things that are role actions, you still have access to on Red Mage. Black Mage, while it can completely wreck shit, and that's a completely honest opinion, especially after recent buffs that were massive for the job. I've seen Black Mages tearing apart Omega Savage. Red Mage just easier to play for a lot of people, so they'll stick with that. Summoner, seen them do okay. I think their numbers, it's been confirmed, are showing as lower than what we actually, or the numbers we see are actually lower than the amount of damage being dealt. So it's better for them than it seems, but they've got a lot of little like pet AI issues and stuff like that. And we'll talk about that in a Summoner video I'm going to be doing soon enough. And they have just so much complexity for just what doesn't feel like enough payoff to really compare them side by side to Red Mage. So I think Red Mage doesn't deserve to be nerfed, but if the other jobs are going to be either more punishing or more complex, whether it be movement or the way their rotations pan out, the reward for playing those jobs, I feel, should be higher. Summoner, of course, has several party buffs. It has the Ifrit physical buff. It has the Garuda magic buff. Devotion needs changing over there. But just Red Mage's Embolden and Verraise are just such a huge impact on the way that the job has sort of changed the landscape of raiding. Just imagine, like I said earlier, both your healers are dead, and your Red Mage reses both of them and cures the tank. That's insane. No other DPS could even come close to bringing that. Summoner is the closest thing, being able to throw out, like, I don't even know how crappy their physics are, and one instant cast res, which then if anything goes wrong for you, you're screwed as well. So there's so many things that just lead to Red Mage getting leaned on, and it's why I really suspect Black Mage may continue to see more buffs, and Summoner, while we know they recently got some very undesirable changes, is likely to receive pretty massive buffs. They're pretty much in a similar boat to what Astro was in back when 3.0 first launched, or maybe what Machinist was in. Let's not talk about Machinist in this video, because that's going to turn into a whole different thing. I love Red Mage. I love what they've done with it. It feels good to play. I've enjoyed leveling it. Like 50 through 70 was great for me the entire time. I didn't get bored, even though it's not an incredibly complex job to play, because they capture the essence of what I believe a Red Mage should look like in an MMO with the Holy Trinity. And you just feel really awesome when you're doing these things, when you're dashing in for your melee combo, when you save the party with that Verraise. It's so rewarding to play properly, and those big numbers definitely help as well. I wish they didn't perform so well based on how easy they are to play. But if they're gonna, I don't want them to be brought down. I do not want them to be nerfed. But I want to see the other casters rewarded adequately for the effort that it requires to play them. And I feel Red Mage has gotten that right. Black Mage is almost there. Maybe a little more would be nice. And then Summoner, we'll see what happens. So Red Mage, awesome. If you're thinking about playing it, you're on the fence, it looks cool, you're not really sure, you're probably going to like it. In my opinion, just do Palace of the Dead until 60, because you don't want to play level 50 to 59 Red Mage. You just want to play at 60 to 70, where it feels pretty good the entire time. 68 to 70 is kind of weird, because you have one of your Verflare Verholy skills, and you don't have the other. So it's kind of weird there, but other than that, it plays perfectly fine. And that's going to be a wrap for my overview and thoughts on the Red Mage job. Remember, if you are looking for a full-blown guide, I put that Elysium one in the description of the video, and of course there's tons of other resources out there. So whatever you can find, use it. I'm going to wrap up this video and get working on Scholar Thoughts, which, well, yeah, a lot of people have been waiting on those, but I'll talk about that when we get to it. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for more information, news, overviews, thoughts, everything on Final Fantasy XIV. Thank you, and until next time, take care.